Good day, everyone. We are here back for the African American Experience course, EDAD 600, who is sponsoring the Power to Define speaker series. African American Experience course, EDAD 600, who is sponsoring. Sorry, I had to unmute myself online. We're here for the Power to Define speaker series. We're here, we are promoting insights that are relevant to the psychosocial, historical context of the extant African American. These insights will focus on topics such as self and racial identity, prejudice and racism. We're here today to talk about health and mental health and wellness, socialization and dynamics, as well as achievement in schooling. The power to define is a notion that I learned several years ago under my mentor, A. Boykin, where we do not have to be relegated by someone else's definition, and we seize the power to define ourselves, our ways of being. We have here today talking about adjustment, mental health, and wellness, Dr. Benson George Cooke. He is a professor of counseling and psychology and clinical coordinator for the graduate mental health counseling program at the illustrious University of the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. Dr. Cooke will give you kung fu, if you will, in psychology, as he is the former national president of the Association of Black Psychologists from 2009 and 2011. Now, this organization, the ABPSI, is the most premier African-American-based psychology organization. It is the first and largest that was carved out, I believe, in 1969. Is that correct, Brother Benson? I'm going to go with 1969 then until he can respond. 1969, where
1968.
1968. Thank you, sir. Where ABPSI broke away from the APA organization. In 2016, Dr. Cooke received the 2016 ABPSI Most Distinguished Psychologist Award, and I was there to see it, and I have the pictures. Dr. Cooke is a recipient also of the 2020 Faculty Excellence Award for teaching at the University of the District of Columbia. This is the first award of its kind, and he received it. Dr. Cooke is the author of numerous journals, articles, publications, conference presentations nationally and internationally. And his most recent book is titled All About Depression, Issues, Treatments, Resources, and it's the second edition, published in 2019. His humble beginnings started as he earned his doctorate in counseling, psychology, and mental health administration from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. He earned a Master's of Science in Clinical Psychology, also from UMass Amherst, and his Bachelor's of Arts degree is in psychology from Morehouse College, Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Cooke serves as a big brother to me, a mentor, professionally, personally. He has graciously agreed to join us today, is what I would call him giving community service. And I humbly appreciate it. Similar to some of the other panelists, Dr. Cooke is my colleague, but he is my friend every single day. And I tell you, he demonstrates the epitome of my brother's keeper. Dr. Cooke, I'm going to hand this over to you. And with that said, please share us just a slice of your knowledge.
Hopefully it'll be better than a slice. Greetings, everyone. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to start off with a PowerPoint presentation. I kind of refer to this as a dog and pony show, in the sense that I like to use a combination of video clips, PowerPoints. I may even read a little something just to kind of bring everything together. And I hope that that will be able to provide some insightful information related to the work that I do. So I want to share my screen and get right into this. as time is of the essence. Okay, let's go here. Okay, I imagine everyone could see this. So I think it's fair to say that as a graduate student at UMass Amherst, one of the areas that I found myself specializing in, not because it was by choice, but because I asked a question that my advisor said I needed to consider thinking about. And that was why I felt so depressed working with depressed folk. The comment was, work with that, work with that. And so I found myself working with that ever since. And now I've had an opportunity to do a book in 2013 and a book in 2019 on that particular issue. But what I found is that my work in that particular area really kind of allowed me to stretch out into areas outside of that. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you is based upon the work outside of the silo of being a psychologist and incorporating other evidence into my work to kind of expand to a point of developing what I would like to think of as generational treatment strategies for people who suffer from mental illness, more specifically depression, and incorporating that in many ways to understanding the Black experience. So that's a mouthful, but let's see if we can kind of pull it all together. Okay, as I said, a lot of the work that I did in this regard to this presentation focuses on this, but I've done other work outside of this that I may kind of bring pieces of it into it. In 2013, I had an opportunity to do the first book on all about depression with a brother of mine, Brother Sky Webb. We both were Morehouse graduates, and then we both went on to UMass Amherst. He was ahead of me, but I found that as he was moving more into the armed forces, we were kind of able to bring our ideas together that culminated in that first book. But I found that in working with him, I really grew to appreciate working with others, kind of bringing their information, their knowledge, their expertise in, and expanding the base of my insights around the particular issue. So with the second edition that came out in 2019, I incorporated an IO psychologist, a neuropsychologist, a community clinical psychologist, a psychiatric social worker who specialized in trauma, a rehab psychologist, and a rehab counselor. So it really expanded the base of that information. For me, it was about looking at how we might focus on expanding how we think about research in mental health that would be culturally rooted, looking at multidisciplinary therapeutic approaches that I consider to be multi-layered. And when I say multi-layered, by that, simply put, I'm talking about moving from the psychological into the physiological, into the biological, into the neurological, into the genetic and epigenomic piece. So it's kind of multi-layered. And I found that to be something that, again, I didn't expect it, but it happened. So a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you is also part of my journey, meaning that I started off in one direction, but every time I came to a crossroad, I chose the path less traveled. And that sounds like a book, doesn't it? But I ended up choosing a path that I had not anticipated because of the questions that were being asked at that particular time. Okay. Again, why depression? Because it was something that I found myself interested in and found myself doing. Now, what's interesting here is I've had an opportunity to more recently read a number of books that have come out I'm always reading anyway. I think libraries are the best things to have. And there's one book in particular, I want to share something that kind of fits, it's a brief piece, that kind of fits the notion of the direction that I've been going in. Need to make sure I find it. I bookmarked it. Okay. All right. So I don't know how many of you have really been kind of expanding your knowledge and understanding of what's happening with this influenza virus, COVID-19, that has created this worldwide pandemic. For me, it really caught my attention in February and March, and I ordered a book. I didn't really read the book until the summer, and the book is titled The Great Influenza by John Barry. this is the book. I'm going to be showcasing a lot of books because I think that really helps us. There are two sections in this book that really I would like to kind of draw attention to as I've been doing writing on the impact of how we understand mental illness during this pandemic, but also just to give one a deeper sense of kind of exploration. So at the beginning of the book, Barry kind of approaches this particular issue of science. You know, you've been hearing everybody say, follow the science. So he starts off, he says, the two most important questions in science are, what can I know and how can I know it? Really interesting. What can I know and how can I know it? And then he goes on to say, science and religion, in fact, part ways over the first question, what each can know. Religion, and to some extent philosophy, believes it can know, or at least address the question of why. For most religions, the answer to this question ultimately comes down to the way God ordered it. Religion is inherently conservative, even when proposing a new God only creates a new order. The question why is too deep for science. Science instead believes it can only learn how something occurs. The revolution of modern science, and especially medical science, began as science not only focused on this answer to what can I know, but more important, changed its method of inquiry, changed its answer to how can I know it. And that kind of brings me to, you know, my exploration of depression, you know, to the what and how can I know it. So we have these rubrics, these books of nomenclature. One that I mentioned here is the DSM-5, that kind of speaks to how we would describe a particular mental illness, depression. This was where I began to do my work, my practicum work, my internship work, my postdoctorate internship work, and most of my research. I found that it kind of took me to a number of places, and one place in particular that I found really interesting was looking at this particular issue that you have in front of you right now. And it's kind of like critical thinking about this. And this particular quote I found really kind of apropos. Psychiatry as a subspecialty of medicine aspires to define, you know, certain mental illnesses as precisely as, say, cancer of the pancreas or a streptococcal infection of the lungs. However, given some of the other things that are going on, this is really kind of difficult to do with precision. So understanding what is wrong with people currently is more of a question or mindset of the practitioner really being able to try to understand what the variable facts or objective facts will probably be. And so here we have a social science working in many ways out of new understandings that have been brought about by science that kind of guide and direct us for expanding our view of this social science. And here's where I have to kind of resort to here. So, interesting thing, data, research, facts. When I talk about generational treatment, someone once asked me, well, why are you talking about generational strategies for depression? And I said, well, let's look at the facts. Here we go. So in 2013, and we're now in 2020, it said by the year 2020, depression is expected to be the second most debilitating disease worldwide. And definitely one that, if you think about depression, you think about suicide as a leading cause of death, and it's second only to heart disease. One of the things that kind of has caused us to kind of relook at this particular issue has been COVID-19. We see that clearly a once in 100-year kind of influenza virus of the kind that when you look at all of the great pandemics that have occurred worldwide since 500 BC, the majority have been influenza. So clearly that is a killer. But at the same time, we know that heart disease is a killer. But not many people have often considered the impact of depression. So here we kind of look at that, but it goes on. If you're looking at generational illness issues, Major depressive disorders is 1.5 times more common among first-degree biological relatives. Now, I didn't really think deeply about that at the time, but in 2011, which I'm going to share with you, something happened that got me into this whole issue of looking at it from a biological perspective. I mean, I always recognized biology was important to it, but taking it, as I said, from the physiological to the biological to the neurochemical to the genetic was an area that became really important, especially in terms of looking at the impact of many illnesses, including mental illnesses, from a generational perspective. But one of the factors that always kind of hangs on is this whole issue of disparities. Why is it that, given that it impacts the population as a whole, not everybody in the population receives equity in care? Okay, there are these disparities often impacted by low wealth, often impacted by underserved populations, that really results in many people not getting the care that is available. Or when they get the care that is available, there is a bias by the clinicians that basically does not provide the optimal care that is available. At the same time, there's an economic burden associated with depression. You know, it's the most burdensome disorders worldwide. If you look at how people who are depressed impact businesses, you see that by far more than any other illness, depression is basically a $1 billion cost issue. Okay, so it's something that clearly one needs to look into. A good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Thomas Parham, when he helped write the foreword for the first book, he had this saying, healing is therapeutic, but not all therapy is healing. What this stated, to me at least, is that if we're going to begin to look at ways of providing curative factors, we have to look at therapies that have cultural salience to it, that basically require people to not only be culturally sensitive, but to apply some degree of competency to the work that they do with populations. In other words, to recognize the bias that one might have about someone who's different and begin to find ways to eradicate that. So I really liked this particular cartoon figure. This was one of the figures that I was able to pull out of an article that I wrote back in 2005 and 6 after Hurricane Katrina. And as you see it here, you know, it's like, and when the waters receded, issues that had been there before that oftentimes were like underplayed could no longer be underplayed. You know, when they were looking, and I used to live there, that's where I worked at George Mason, I mean, at Xavier University of Louisiana. For those who are from there, New Orleans, from those who are not, New Orleans. It was really interesting that in terms of work looking in the school systems, there were environmental toxins that were impacting the capacity of learning for young African-American youth who were in certain communities where there were greater issues around plants that had toxicity or spillage that they didn't care where they were doing, you know, dumping garbage and things like that. So race, class, poverty, and inequality were clearly impactful in the help that people got. And if you think about it, realistically, not much has changed from then to now. So from 2005 Gulf Coast to 2019 COVID-19 to 2020, of course. One of the other things that I began to look at this point then is how, if you're talking about depression and you're talking about the circumstances that I mentioned in this previous slide, where you're talking about, you know, individual, institutional, systematic, or what people now call systemic racism, then, and you're talking about poverty or low wealth, and you're talking about underserved, and it's interesting, you talk about class, the new book, Caste Systems, really, I think, articulates that very clearly. then you have to look at the impact of anxiety disorders as well and how we see it. So one of my colleagues who does research, he's a neuropsychologist and does research on sleep and sleep disorders and how that kind of is connected with that particular issue. It all brings us to a conversation about the insidious forms of racism, institutional or systemic racism. In this regard, we begin to see that in our research that there is this kind of relationship or correlation in terms of what's happening to African-American community more so than any other community. So it was really interesting. In my research, I found this particular book that you see, and I highly recommend you acquire it. It talks about the Holocaust. And what's really interesting about this is we know that those who were killed off, the children who saw their parents and siblings and family members killed, they definitely suffered from the trauma and had post-traumatic, stress disorder from that. But what was interesting in this book was the research that showed that even generations removed, those who did not see their grandparents, did not see their parents, did not see their siblings, did not see their family members died, also suffered from trauma as well. Very similar to a post-traumatic slave syndrome book that had been written by Joy DeGruy. So I found that, okay, wait a minute, there's something deeper happening here that it becomes important to understand. So one of the things that I do to kind of express this is, I can't do it now because, we're doing it virtually, but when I do presentations, I have this activity that I do called the broken plate activity. So to kind of give you an idea of it, since I'm not going to be able to do it, I would bring out a very ornate plate. And this plate on the right is kind of ornate. You see different symbols on the edges or in the middle. And I would take the plate and show it around. Everybody would get a chance to look at it and touch it if I were doing a face-to-face presentation. And I would describe the cost of the plate. I would describe the importance and value of the plate, because usually I would go out and get a valuable plate. Not too valuable, but valuable enough to make the point. And then what I would do, I would take the plate and I would put it back in the gift box that I had taken it out of. In other words, I bring in the gift box beautifully wrapped with ribbons and everything, beautiful colored tissue paper. I'd wrap it back up, put it back in there. And then I would be very, very violent in my next move. I would bring out my sledgehammer and I would smash the plate. And I don't know if this is gonna kind of give you a sense of that, but I would do something along the lines of this. But it'd be much louder, and I'd be just breaking it and I wouldn't stop. I'd just keep going and going and going. And people would be like, oh my God, Dr. Cooke has lost his mind. He hadn't even started the presentation. And he's just breaking and breaking and breaking this plate. And then what I would do is I would take out a blank, no image on the plate. And I'd say, look, it's okay. I have not lost my mind. My mind is intact. And what I've done is I pulled out exactly what the image is. And people look at me and say, no, no, no. It had ornate objects. I said, no, it didn't. This is the plate. I said, now don't question me. I'm the authority. I have my doctorate, my master's, my bachelor's degree. I've done research for many years. I'm the expert on this. I mean, you wouldn't have brought me in to speak if I were not expert on this particular subject. And then you have some people be like, okay, maybe he's right. Other people be like, no, I know what I saw. I saw blah, 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 blah. And I said, don't be questioning the authority here. And eventually the room would get quiet because it's like, look, he really did lose his mind. At that point, we'd have a discussion. And the shatter plate experience is part of what I put together in the first book I wrote in 2001. And one of the things I would ask is like, what were your feelings when you saw me break the plate? And people would be like, man, I thought you lost your mind. Like why did you take the time of putting it in a box and wrapping it up and passing it around if you were going to do that? You know, and then I'd have them talk among themselves about what it was like. Because that's what happens when trauma occurs. Okay. People will kind of like imagine in their mind what took place. They'll have conversations with people who may be familiar with the experience that took place. Then I talk about any memories that people had of a similar nature. What I'm getting at here, as I said to the participants, and as I'm saying to you, is that, you know, trauma really has a profound impact on us on multiple levels. You know, visual, auditory, then it begins to get into our memories. We talk about it from a perception of what it did to us in terms of psychologically reawakening traumas, maybe from the past, from something that happened, you know, emotionally, or something that happened physiologically, you know, and we break it all the way down. And then I explain, okay, so we're breaking it down to multiple levels. So we could take it from the psychological to the physiological, to the biological, to the neurological, to the genetic level. And our body does this as a way of remembering things to enhance our survival. And so then the question becomes, well, what's this all about? Well, how do you unthink this experience? And the reality is, it's very difficult unless you engage in strategies that recognize what happened, recognize the profound impact of what's happened, so that whatever you do to create change creates a meaningful change, not one that just masks over for you to be re-traumatized at an even higher degree the next time. Okay. So this gets into looking at pathways for optimal restoration, emancipation, and illumination. And that's what I talk about. And so I mentioned the fact that, okay, when I was very young, my mother used to say something to me. She would say, son, you need to know who you are and whose you are. And I'd be like, okay, Mama, what you mean by that? She said, well, in the society in which we currently live, you have to be 200% prepared. I'd be like, why? She said, because the first 100% leaves when they see who you are. The other 100% is based upon how I raise you. Because if you know who you are and you know the history that you bring with you, if you recognize the shoulders that you stand on, there's only so much that a person can do to break you down below that. I said, okay. So one of the things that I really enjoyed about my mom and my uncles is that they would always make me aware of the rich legacy from which I came. They made me aware of the fact that, for example, as a young African-American male, that I came from a legacy historically that basically represented the first people on the planet, the people who basically pulled together, you know, the first language, the first music, the first mathematics, the first science, the first, you know, of everything that exists, the first writings, you know, everything. And then they would show me books that made me aware of that. So I was always like, okay, I get it. One of the things that needs to happen for some people who don't recognize that, who might say, well, you know, how you know that? How is that true? Well, here I have it on the slide. And I basically say, what are the receipts? What is the evidence? And the evidence comes in many forms: eyewitness accounts, metallurgical evidence, linguistic evidence, oceanographic evidence, navigational evidence, skeletal evidence, epigraphic, pictorial, iconographic, botanical, cartographic, oral, and documented evidence. And these are the things that become really important as a part of this experience. It's helping you recognize that by knowing this, you use this as a tool to begin to move towards a healing. So this is what that particular experience did. And then I kind of codified it through the work that I've done since that time. So now this is like the first part. I have two more parts that are really important here. So I'll move through the second part a little more quickly to bring you to the third part, and then I'll tie it all together. One of the things that becomes important, and I'm showing this book, so it's something that you may want to look at. I was able to do it with two other co-authors, and these were the two chapters that I contributed. Creating, you know, the fact that cultural conditioning has occurred that has caused us to lose sight of who and whose we are. So this first chapter is dedicated to helping you understand that. The second chapter is dedicated to helping you understand the impact of the homegrown terrorism that was responsible for creating that shattering, so that you can then begin to see the solutions for turning things around. This was the very first book that I put together in 2001 when I was at George Mason, that was designed to really empower students to be able to be all that they were born to be, to fulfill the purpose for which they were born, as I oftentimes say. But in this, I began to provide them of a sense that, you know, there is something in them that can be tapped into if they're fully empowered. So what does that mean? Well, this, as I say here, is an empowered individual, someone who can learn to bring that which is from within on the outside. And there's strategies that are put together here to be able to do that. And among the strategies, I hope this one works, I talk about self and cultural awareness, family group community connections, spiritual growth, individual group preservation, positive self-distinction, self-esteem, and educational economic growth. And these were the keys to personal empowerment. Okay. So this then brings us to the question. I know you said you were going to talk about depression, and I am going to get to some of that, but some of the other peripheral pieces to that are understanding the impact of oppression, understanding the impacts or the effects of racism. And this becomes an important part of how to pull all this together. Just give you one quick note on this. We know that stigma plays a significant role in why many people don't seek mental health support. But there's a degree of cultural mistrust that exists in the African-American community because of the things that had been done. And I have a book I'm going to show you later where I get more into that. So one of the organizations that Dr. Coleman mentioned earlier, the Association of Black Psychologists, founded in 1968, has and continues to play a leading role, you know, in providing opportunities for students, early career, mid-career, and seasoned professionals to have a voice, to speak to the issues through their conversations, through their research, through their scholarship and publications, through their workshops, through their jegnership or mentoring, in many different ways that no other organization really provides that voice or that venue for. So it's an organization that I'm endeared to very much, because it's an organization that also helped us begin to look at some of the factors that could lead to creating emotional emancipation as a health factor. You know, so being able to change the narrative became really important. You know, for example, when people talk about Black Lives Matters and you get the argument like, well, all lives matter. No, we're talking about focus versus exclusion. Okay, and so the emotional emancipation circles that have been formulated by the Association of Black Psychologists give a voice to that. And all of this, again, is a significant part of what I want to begin to talk about that affects us at the multiple layers. So these are some of the authors whose books I think are very critical to beginning to help us to address this. The works of people like Dr. Naeem Akbar, the people like Dr. Wade Nobles, and I know I'm going to leave out some, but it's not to exclude, it's just to share those that have been the most impactful for me. Dr. Linda James Myers, the late Dr. Fred Phillips and his work on into psychology or psychotherapy, Dr. Thomas Parham, Dr. Edwin J. Nichols, and of course, in this particular book, I really enjoy it, where you're looking at multiple resources, counseling persons of African descent, raising the bar of cultural practitioner competence. This is a work where he brought in many different people like Cheryl Grills and others, so that we begin to get to this piece of understanding what culture is. You know, and here I've kind of defined it for you, being that culture represents that vast process or the vast structure of behaviors, ideas, attitudes, values, beliefs, customs, language, ritual ceremonies, practices that are peculiar to a particular group of people, and which provides them with the general design for living and patterns for interpreting reality. So culture is that which helps guide and direct us to be successful in surviving in this world. Okay. One of the things that really kind of guided me, and I'm looking at my time, making sure that I don't go over for some of the other things I want to get to, is, and this kind of is a stepping stone to where I want to take us next, is that Dr. Thomas Parham said something to me once when I was very new in the field. And he said, you know, we have to become social engineers. And by that, I think simply put, it means not staying isolated in the silo of your uh, intellectual discipline, but recognizing that you can move outside of that and incorporate, as you move outside, others, areas of other disciplines and other ways of thinking, recognizing that each is inextricably connected to the other in terms of helping us to really create strategies that can enhance kind of optimal living. Okay, so I'm going to move past this and take us. These are some of the books I mentioned in terms of factors impacting emotional healing. And I will, by the way, Dr. Coleman, I will share this series of slides if you want to have others have access to it. Because I know sometimes people are like, oh man, he's rushing through. Man, I got gypped out of that, man. What's wrong? You know, so I go do that to you. I'm rushing through to get to some key points with the time I have remaining, but I will provide Dr. Coleman with the slides. After the presentation is over, there's a few that I have to edit, but I'll send it to him. I mentioned earlier cultural mistrust. This book on my left, probably your left too, Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington, is a must-read book. I usually tell people that I know, if you're reading that book, make sure you have the company of someone else reading it with you, because the stories are just heartbreaking, but very true to understanding, you know, why we feel the way we do. The book on the right, Acres of Skin, kind of speaks to the experimentation that has and continues to go on in prisons. Of course, most people are most familiar with the syphilis studies. These books here and another one that I'm about to show kind of focus on that, as well as the studies that were done with HIV/AIDS. And so these are some of the studies, books. These are some of the articles that kind of speak to, well, why are, you know, police and those in authority, you know, treating our young people the way that they do? Well, researchers have gone into this and kind of explored why this is happening. And these articles kind of deal with that, like the dehumanizing of Black children. So defining your role in building for eternity. Dr. Thomas Parham always talks about we need to be building for eternity. And that's kind of where my work is. So if I use what I've already shown you as the foundation, I want to now share with you some of the scaffolding around the work that I've been doing. In 2011, I had an opportunity to speak on the Diane Rehm Show, National Public Radio, about an issue that had occurred in 1992 that was coming up again in 2011. In other words, there were researchers that were engaged in trying to suggest that African Americans in particular were genetically predisposed to criminal behavior. And so they invited me on the show. I think the intent was to have this angry Black man get on there and like, how dare you do this, blah, blah, blah. But I went on basically, it's like, well, where'd you get your research? Where'd you get your data? And one of the keynote speakers that was there said, we got it from incarcerated people. I said, well, did it occur to you that African Americans are disproportionately incarcerated for non-criminal effects? And he said, well, you know, we live in a post-racial world now. We have a Black president. No. That did not answer the question. So we got into the weeds on this, and you can hear it more in the program. But the goal was to begin to make sure that what happened in '92 did not continue past 2011, because what was discovered was that where we thought a halt was put on trying to tie genes to crime, which disproportionately impacted African Americans, continued. Okay, kind of under the radar, so to speak. So as a result of that, one of the things that happened to me was I said, well, if geneticists are going to be engaged in this kind of work, we need to be, psychologists need to be at the table. And to be at the table means that we need to be participating in the conversation. And so in that particular context, this next segment I want to show you is what happened when we began to sit at the table. When we began to sit at the table, it basically brought a new level of understanding. That new level of understanding was understanding something about the epigenome. So we know about the DNA, you know, we have a holiday coming up, and I'm hoping most of you will be doing it virtually. but it typically goes like this. Oh, cousin so-and-so, little so-and-so, you look just like so-and-so. You smile like them, you talk like them. Oh my goodness. Like they just spit you out. Okay, that's the conversation. We talk about genotype, phenotype, but there's something deeper. We know that also we talk about illness. Oh, you know, so-and-so had that illness too. So certain things are hereditary, or as the DSM used to talk about, familial effects. So in that context, based upon that program and what I started learning, I began to, not being a geneticist, study genetics to the extent of understanding epigenomics, having conversations, sitting at the table to basically see how could this impact the psychology of what's going on. So this brought me, so I'm going to skip through this, to research that, and I knew that was going to happen, so let me. Okay, move through that. This kind of brought me to something I want to share with you. So when I talk about epigenomics, and I know Dr. Coleman, I'm coming to the 6 o'clock hour, but I'm probably going to do maybe 5-6 more minutes and I'll be able to wrap it up.
Take your time, brother.
For Q&A. Okay, so I'm not sure everyone understands epigenomics. So what I'm going to do here, kind of end this for a minute. And I'm going to go to this. So as I said, I have an ebook all about depression, issues, treatment, and resources, 2nd edition, 2019, Kindle Hub Publishing Company. So that's me pushing my book. Yeah. Ain't no shame in that game. All right. What I love about the ebook is that it provides you with opportunities to pull out information in a video format for things that you may have challenges reading, because not everybody understands all of the biological, the physiological, the neurological, and all of that. So I've got video cues to kind of guide you through from the government. So this is one that I want to share with you on understanding epigenomics.
DNA contains the instructions for building all the parts of the body. DNA only the DNA in our bodies is wrapped around proteins called histones. Both the DNA and histones are covered with chemical tags. This second layer of structure is called the epigenome. The epigenome shapes the physical structure of the genome. It tightly wraps inactive genes, making them unreadable. It relaxes active genes, making them easily accessible. Different sets of genes are active in different cell types. The DNA code remains fixed for life, but the epigenome is flexible. Epigenetic tags react to signals from the outside world, such as diet and stress. The epigenome adjusts specific genes in our genomic landscape in response to our rapidly changing environment.
Okay, now I'm going to do something a little different than planned. Minimize this. There it goes. Okay, so before I come back to the PowerPoint, I'm going to skip a little down and by showing you a video. In other words, here's the way to think about this. I'm going to stop sharing here so I can get you ready for this, what I'm about to show you. So there are certain illnesses that are hereditary. All of us probably can look at our family and find things that are going on. I always talk about my family, where there's diabetes on my mother's side. She passed away, and all of her siblings from illnesses related to that. On my father's side, heart disease. And I have siblings who have this. I don't. It's not that I'm favored. My mother said something to me early in life, and if she were still alive, I'd say, wow, you set me on my course without me even knowing it. In that clip on the epigenome, you heard about nutritional factors. And so what I want to show you is a video clip to show you the power of nutritional factors for Black folk. And so after I show you this, then I'll kind of wrap everything kind of up around where my current research is in terms of the epigenome. Think about it this way. Those chemical tags act like an on-off switch. They can cut hereditary illnesses on, or they can keep them off. So let me show this, and it will make a whole lot more sense. So I got to set the environment. Hold on a second. Okay. Dr. Coleman and I went through this, so we know it's going to work a little bit. All right, here we go.
I appreciate you showing us that you're wearing the host suit also.
Oh yeah, brother, I don't play. No pajamas here. All right. Oh, and unfortunately, because of proprietary issues, I'm unable to show, put it into the computer itself. So here we go.
At the University of Pittsburgh, researchers are exploring just how eating mostly plants may promote health.
We're particularly interested.
Colon cancer specialist Stephen O'Keefe spent many years working in Africa, where he saw very little colon cancer among his patients. But when he moved to the United States, he was struck by the fact that African Americans have one of the highest colon cancer rates in the world, even though many are genetically similar to Africans.
Studies have demonstrated that the factor most associated with differences in colon cancer between Africans and African Americans is diet.
Most Africans tend to eat more vegetables, fruits, beans, and whole grains, and less processed food than we do in the West. And those plant-based foods contain substances our bodies can't digest, which we call fiber. We understood for a long time that fiber was important, and we thought it was important to help people overcome constipation and improve what's called transit time of food through your body. But O'Keefe's studies reveal that fiber does something else. It feeds bacteria in the colon that help to keep it healthy by producing a compound called butyrate.
Our cells don't produce it, but bacterial cells do. If you eat enough fiber, you maintain a bacterial population that convert the fiber into butyrate, which maintains the health of the colon and prevents cancer.
Fiber is food for these microbes. And if you don't feed it to them, they're not going to be well, and you're not going to be well. And the less fiber you eat, O'Keefe has found, the more bacteria you have that make harmful compounds that can lead to cancer. Since the Western diet that many African Americans eat is low in fiber, and most Africans get plenty of fiber, O'Keefe wondered what would happen if Africans and African Americans switched diets. O'Keefe's team fed fiber-rich diets to African Americans and fiber-poor diets to people in South Africa.
And then we basically measured substances that are good or bad for the colon before and then 2 weeks after their dietary switch.
After just 2 weeks, the amount of harmful compounds increased in the colons of the Africans, while the amount of beneficial compounds like butyrate increased in the African Americans.
This is a good trick. This is very dramatic. It's very easy to see.
Yeah.
The exciting thing is that by changing your diet, you or I can influence our risk of colon cancer in just 2 weeks.
So the larger lesson is that we're not just eating for ourselves. We're eating for the trillions of microbes that inhabit us, like the ones that help protect breastfed babies. The community of microbes inside us has become known as the microbiome.
Okay. Stop that, bring us back. Okay. So, we pull back the, oh, this is a first. Okay. Share screen again. Bring us back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So for me, my research since 2011 has been doing a meta-analysis to pull together information that speaks to the health factors, the social factors at critical developmental periods. And I've focused on nutrition, among other things, but with colleagues who also are able to provide information about, psychological stress. I've incorporated that, and to some extent, environmental toxins as well, because it significantly impacts low wealth communities, underserved communities. And so I want to take us through, and again, you're going to get this. These are some of the other health factors that are important. And I want to look at this real quick. So for example, there's a short list of foods that don't work and a short list of foods that work. There's more, but if you just wanted to do like a quick, go-to, sugar, really interesting. It causes inflammation. And again, I talk about myself, and I realize, it's on video. About almost 3 years now, 2.5 years ago, I would go to Starbucks around the corner from the university, and they knew me. They say, "Hey, here come Doc. Get him some coffee for his sugar," because I get a cup of sugar and put about 10 bags of sugar in it. And then I would go to the bookstore and get me a Mounds candy bar, a Hershey's Dark candy bar, a pecan roll. On the way home, I stopped and get me some Archway lemon frosted cookies and a Twix dark chocolate. I mean, I was like doing it up. And then I would eat and go straight to sleep, almost like I'd taken a drug. And I was having difficulty visually. I was having I hadn't gone to the extent that I was opening up what my mom and my dad hereditarily would have passed on, but I was getting close. And so long story short, I stopped doing that. And after stopping for just about maybe 2 months, I went to my doctor, my eye doctor, ophthalmologist. And my appointment would normally be about 2 minutes. He talked to me for 45 minutes. Kind of scared me at first, because he said, "What have you done?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "What have you done? What have you done?" And I was like, "Well, you're scaring me, Doc." He said, "No, I'm looking at the screen and everything's gone. What have you done?" I said, "Well, I stopped eating sugar, cookies, cake, pie, candy." He said, "That's it." I said, "What?" He said, "Before I became an ophthalmologist, I was an emergency room surgeon. It causes inflammation. Whatever you did, I don't need to see you for another year. You don't have to come every 3 months anymore." Then I went about a week or two later to my primary care physician. She said, "What have you done?" I knew the answer now. "Oh, okay. I stopped eating sugar, cookies, cake, pie, candy." She said, "Oh, yeah, it causes inflammation." So I said, "Wait a minute, Doc." I said, "All these years, why didn't you ever say that?" She said, "Because most people, in processed foods, there's so much sugar. And then when people add it on, the addiction kind of takes hold. And they don't have the time to spend to do that." The point being is that it had a profound impact in my life, and I know from the research it's had a profound impact on others as well. How to eat to live becomes a really important mantra. And for the work that I'm doing, it also has an impact in terms of one of the strategies that can really help generationally to deal with depression. And for people who are already oppressed and dealing with all of the vestiges of systemic racism, it's also another important factor if we want to begin to put people on a path to optimal health. So these are the things that I began looking at. The journey started in one place, it opened up into other areas. So that now I find myself doing research with people who are in, nutrition, who are in, food sciences. This is the interesting one here. I'm just showing this to say that among the research we do is we look at capturing what's happening in the District of Columbia. I used to always call them food deserts, but then somebody said, the desert ain't never hurt nobody. It's food apartheid. So I switched that out and said, okay, food apartheid. But the point is that, just quickly, because I'm out of time, if you look at the areas in the district where there are, on the left, grocery stores, on the right, liquor stores and corner stores, you see that there is a clear disparity in terms of what's available and what our people have access to. This one, you can see the distance to get to a grocery store versus the distance to get to a corner store. And we know everything in the corner store is processed. Okay. The other point that I want to pull up here is understanding that when you think about drugs versus amino acids in terms of neurotransmitters, which have an impact on understanding, what might be behind some of the symptoms we experience with depression. We know that certain foods help build up neurotransmitters, where drugs only work with what's there. So knowing what we eat impacts us at a genetic level, an epigenomic level, a neurotransmitter level, a neuron level, a biological level, a physiological level, and a psychological level. That's kind of where I'm going. This was the video clip. You're going to get the slides. You'll be able to see this. It's got a lot more stuff in there, but I just showed you that particular clip. So it's about becoming agents of change. So I work very closely at the University of the District of Columbia with the program that focuses on developing urban food hubs. We go into the inner city areas and we basically work with creating gardens that they're able to grow foods. They're able to, so plant foods, grow foods, harvest foods, cook foods, sell foods, that kind of thing, so that we're able to really provide the kind of resources that are needed. Okay. And then that kind of brings me to the end. Bam. Okay, went over, but that's kind of, and people will be able to have access to that. Okay, so I'll make sure, Dr. Coleman, by tomorrow you'll have the full PowerPoint slides for anybody who was interested in them to have. And that's kind of where I am with my research right now. Just submitted an article. I'm really enjoying working with people who basically comprise many of the areas in psychology, now many of the areas in nutritional and food science, many of the areas in environmental science, because to understand how we're going to basically provide healing strategies in the communities that are most impacted, we have to use everything that's available as a tool to basically effectively engage the population at hand. So that's it.
Dr. Cooke, thank you so very much. We do have a few minutes for some questions, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Thank you. I have a question from our doctoral student, Stephen Thorne. How do we discern, and let me give you some backdrop. Soon to be Dr. Thorne is a middle school teacher. Sorry to put you out there, but just to give you context for his question. How do we discern the signs of depression in students when most of the time their faces are not shown in class in our current virtual environment?
So when people pause or they say, oh, that's a really good question, that means that they don't have a readily available answer. I would say, thinking about it a little, is that it's really important to kind of communicate and kind of get a sense of what's going on. The way that you know someone is depressed, it depends, first of all, on their age. Prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop for somebody to tell you what's going on cognitively till they're in a young adult. So I'd say about 21. When they're older, they can kind of articulate cognitively, this is what's going on. This is how I'm feeling. I've been feeling this way for more than 2 weeks. And so we can pretty much kind of arrive at a diagnosis. If they're in their teenage years, we know that we're going to see acting out kind of behaviors. And we know that oftentimes when you're looking at people who might be bullies, that might be what's going on. You look at aggressive behaviors, that's what's going on. In children, we see it more in psychosomatic. In other words, you know, my stomach is hurting all the time, but there's nothing that reveals a stomach illness. You know, my joints and things like that are hurting, but there's nothing to reveal any kind of physiological cause for that. So people kind of manifest it in different ways based upon where they are developmentally. That's important. The other is just gathering the information. If you're looking at the DSM, it kind of speaks to what some of the symptoms are and the duration that the symptoms have to be existing. And then it's important to bring in, if you're in a school system and they have a psychologist or a counselor who's trained, to be able to provide you with insight as to the feedback that they're getting from that particular student. The challenge, though, when you talk about it in terms of virtual learning, is the freedom that someone might have to share what's going on when that may not be the thing that their parents or guardians want to hear them talking with you about. So it's a challenge. So you have to find an opportunity to get as much information as you can, collaborate with licensed professionals to determine if that information gives you any additional insights, and kind of go from there.
Thank you, Dr. Cooke. We have a comment from YouTube, actually. Excellent. Wish we had more time. Asante Sana, Dr. Cooke.
All right. I just out of back.
Yes, yes, yes.
Good job.
Yes, indeed. I have a question for you.
Mhm.
Sir, how can we use nutrition to buffer environmental stress?
Oh, man. Part of what I didn't get a chance to show a lot of is, you know, how can I put it? I just submitted an article for publication where I kind of speak to that particular issue. And there are a number of different foods that have properties that can really help us to de-stress. For example, one of the things I'd say is, what's your water intake? A lot of times when I call it hydrating, people say, oh, is that a coffee? No, I keep water in here. It just keeps it cold. And if you notice, it's books. I love books. Okay. But hydration is really important. The other is, you know, green vegetables, dark green, the better. Fruits. Like I like to start my morning off with strawberries, blueberries, bananas, apples, oranges, things like that. But depending on what you put in, each has a property to do different things. I mentioned about the importance of amino acids, so or the importance of, you know, foods like salmon. So it's really important. And I would say this. There are many books, but these three I just pulled off the shelf right away. So one has to become educated in the process, as I did. As I said, I'm psychology trained. I was not trained in genetics or epigenomics. I was not trained in food science or nutrition. But the books that I found that really are important that I've used a lot, this is one, Eat to Beat Disease. Very powerful book. It's got a lot of healthy information in here. This book is about 500 pages, really good. This one, although short, is powerful. This particular book, The Happiness Diet, excellent book. So one of the things you notice when I'm talking with people, I'm like, okay, this is what you need to read. And usually I've read it about once or twice and use it for research.
I see a Tad.
Yeah, all of them. And this one is kind of based upon the film that you saw, In Defense of Food. You know, the video clip is kind of separate than the book itself,
Yes.
but both of them by Michael Pollan are really great books. And there are a host of others, but these are the books where I start. And what's also interesting here is, I'll say, when I started talking about this, pulling it together the way that I did, there's no one else out there really making the connections I'm making, which is why it's taking longer to kind of give some of what I need to. It's not really talked about a lot yet, but I think in time, we're going to see as psychologists is that this is going to be another area of study that we need to engage in. I hope I answered the question.
You did, and thank you so much. Dr. Cooke, thank you so much. We have to go. I want to field a question for you, and then maybe I can get it from you via, offline.
Okay.
But I want to, I have a question from a couple of other doctoral students that because I'm going to lean on our connection to get a response from you.
Oh, I
often,
will.
right? So I can field it with some of my students. But what I want to say is I want to thank you. I want to thank you so tremendously. You know, I think we take for granted sometimes, this is some of the things I think about when I think of you. I think we take for granted sometimes the genius in the midst of our community. And you know, you would never know that, you know, I could be standing next to you in the grocery store and you're past president of ABSI, you know, the most premier Black psychology organization in the country and the history of the country. So folks, just for example, right? So I appreciate your model of excellence, your model of effort and perseverance, your model of sibling, because you don't just mentor men, you mentor women as well, right?
Right.
So I appreciate you being a big brother to me. And I'll end this thank you to you with a very quick story. When I got to UDC, I was not in an apartment at all. As you know, I was coordinating the human development program.
Right.
But it was a self-sustaining program. It was not fit in a department. So I came to psychology because psychology is my home. And you were the first person there. And you didn't know me from anything. And you sat down with me. I think we talked for about 30 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes about making sure that I take care of myself.
Right. Remember that.
Right? I remember that first time. So from the first meeting of anyone, you are prepared to just share and uplift whomever you can and subsequently your community. So Dr. Cooke, thank you, not just for coming here tonight, but thank you for coming here tonight, but thank you for being who you are and your work in the field.
I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. So I also want to extend a thank you to all the participants, the students, those who are on YouTube who can't necessarily join or choose not to join, whatever the case may be. I want to thank everyone who decided to come check us out. And for those who will be listening to the YouTube later, thank you to your future self.
Yeah.
A joke from Nicholas Coleman. Speaking of that, thank you to Nicholas Coleman, who is my home technology advisor. He is actually here in the Zoom session to get some knowledge from you too, Dr. Cooke.
Okay.
He makes sure that my links are straight, make sure that my flyers are organized and decent, and he is very gracious to make all the adjustments that I ask.
Okay. If one final thing is, I would say, and I've got a promo for the book.
Yes.
This is the second edition of the book. It's an ebook, but they gave me a hard copy because I asked for one. They don't make hard copies, but they're ebooks because I wanted the electronic stuff to be in there for everybody. It's really comprehensive. Everything that you really heard me talk about is in here, in depth. And it's got a lot of nice video clips for things that people may not understand to kind of help guide you through it. But it's a great collection of information that is collaborated on with scholars in the field. So
thank you. And my last very important thank you is thank you for Bowie State University's conference services, Mrs. Wedderburn and her team in particular. As I shared with you, Dr. Cooke, before we met, and I share every weekend, without Ms. Wedderburn, we would be doing a three-way call several times, and I would be putting up signs to say, you know, for messages. So thank you for making sure that we stay technology connected, Ms. Wedderburn. And I appreciate all of the effort right here on the scenes, and there's a lot of effort that happens out, you know, behind the scenes as well. So as always, I'm very gracious to Ms. Wedderburn and her team.
Okay.
Dr. Cooke, without further ado, I would like to again circle back to say thank you. I will call you later tonight or tomorrow.
Okay, I look forward to it. And again, I'm honored to have been able to be invited to Bowie State University to do this presentation. I'm honored. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To the rest of the class, or to the class, it is 6:25. I'll see you in our class Zoom, our closed session at 6:45.
I got a class right now, 6:30. So I'm gonna head on over there.
Okay.